Don Bartlett, what about the company that was supposed to be monitoring this money, NorthStar, that you wrote about in your piece?
This is a really important one, and maybe a little historical perspective. If you go back to the 1990s, there was a mutual fund, so to speak, in the Bahamas called Evergreen Security, which was selling its certificates around the world, especially in the U.S. Chicago schoolteacher emptied out her retirement fund and invested the entire amount in that. Well, Evergreen Security had been run for the most part by Patrick Thomson, a resident of the Bahamas, for a long time. And it was nothing more than a Ponzi scheme. And in the end, more than 200 million disappeared. Well, it was to Mr. Thomson that this mysterious Thomas Howell in La Jolla, California, turned to create a company for him called NorthStar. And a few years later, lo and behold, NorthStar is retained by the Pentagon to make sure the money in Iraq, the 12 billion and billions more, does not go missing, which of course it did go missing.
When we looked into the background of NorthStar, come to find out this is not your normal accounting or auditing operation. Operates out of a private house in a suburb of San Diego. All attempts to interview the individual, Thomas Howell, who apparently heads NorthStar, failed. He would talk to us a couple times, but said that his hands were tied. The Pentagon would have to give him approval to talk, and they did not. We looked into other aspects of the operation out of this house. Turns out some of it's home improvement. One is supposedly international financial consulting, all very vague, all very, very mysterious. But what does it say to us about the way, in part, we run this war over there, that the Pentagon and the Coalition Provisional Authority turned to a company whose ostensible, one of its functions, running out of that address, is home remodeling, to supervise what's going to happen to billions of dollars being airlifted from this country to Iraq. It may be almost a metaphor for the way we run that whole operation over there.
And were you ever able to trace the way or the connection between these individuals at NorthStar and the contracting agencies in the government that gave them this contract?
No, the only thing that is crystal clear, and Paul Bremer insisted that this was a Pentagon arrangement and that he had no say over this whatsoever, and that NorthStar was basically a creature of the Pentagon in terms of supposedly tracking this money. And again, you're talking about a company set up by a person involved in a $200 million stock scam. It just raises all kinds of questions, you know, as to why the Pentagon would utilize such a resource.
So you have an accounting firm created by a mysterious La Jolla man, by an equally mysterious Bahama resident who specializes in setting up offshore entities used to launder money, concealing assets, avoiding taxes, a man who presided over a securities firm from which $200 million was disappeared. Don Bartlett and Jim Steele, we already talked to you about this in our previous piece. How has the press followed up on this expose in Vanity Fair? Don.
This is interesting. I mean, NorthStar, the company's identity was hanging out there. It's been hanging out there for a long time. But basically, no one has looked at it. And it goes beyond the news media. It also goes to the heart of congressional investigating committees, of government nobody's interested. And that really raises red flags in our mind as to why you wouldn't be curious about a company assigned the task of making sure billions don't disappear, and they disappear.
Well, Don Bartlett and Jim Steele, I want to thank you very much for being with us, for doing the piece in Vanity Fair, and for all of your work. The Pulitzer Prize-winning journalistic team speaking to us from Philadelphia. This is Democracy.